Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here again to unpack the sources you send us, the articles, the research, the ideas you're grappling with. We try and pull out the key insights for you. Today we've got something really interesting. It's material from just one listener, actually two, really fascinating audio excerpts. And at first glance, they feel worlds apart. One gets really deep into some pretty cutting-edge stuff on mathematical cosmology, like the universe's structure. The other one, it plunges us right into this very raw, personal, communal spiritual crisis. There's a lot of heartache, betrayal.
Right. But as the listener framed it for us, and as we started digging in, they're actually deeply connected. Both sources grapple from this unique perspective with divine order and law, how it's supposedly built into creation, and then how it plays out or fails to play out in human communities.
Exactly. So our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack those key insights, find the surprising links between these seemingly disparate sources. Think of it as maybe a shortcut through some really complex, really powerful ideas. Okay, so let's unpack this. We'll start with the first source. This one sits right at the intersection of, well, mathematics, ontology, the study of being, and Quranic cosmology.
Yeah, and what jumps out right away is this concept the source calls the golden constraint. And linked to that, the idea of executable mathematical perfection. They give a specific equation. Let me see. Q3 squared minus Q2 minus Q2 squared equals Q1 squared. And the claim is, using only rational numbers, basically fractions, nothing fancy, this equation lets you encode the golden ratio perfectly. Exactly.
That's the core claim. No irrationals needed, no floating point drift you get in computers, no kind of fuzzy approximations. It's presented as precise. A living, testable law is how they put it. Right? And our listener connects that technical point to something, well, much more spiritual, right? They see this precision, this executability, as making real, the source uses the word reification, making unity, indivisibility, Allah's unbroken law, real within the actual architecture of creation. It's not just a nice idea, it's like encoded.
And they find resonance with the Quran. Specifically, Quran 54.49 is cited. Indeed, we created all things in perfect measure. So this framework, this mathematical structure, is presented as showing that perfect measure isn't just, poetry. It's demonstrable. It's executable, rational, and manifest. You can sort of see it in the math.
Okay, fascinating. Now, staying with that first source, they also bring in this imagery, this cosmic topology of the torus and the cone. What's going on there?
Yeah, these shapes get very specific symbolic meanings in the source. The torus, represented as psi equals 0, that's described as the field of all potential, like creation's womb.
That's how.
Then the cone, phi equals 1, that symbolizes emergence. The moment potential becomes actual. They call it the kayakon moment.
The be and it is moment.
Exactly. They connect it directly to Quranic ontology, how Allah brings things into existence, versus like 3.6b, he who shapes you in the womb as he wills. And that famous one, 36.82, his command, be, and it is. So this whole mathematical geometrical framework, the listener suggests, makes that very transition from potential to form, from divine command to manifestation visible, mathematically understandable even.
And then they take it even further into quantum reality. What are the implications there according to the source?
Right. They introduce this idea of rational quantum encoding. The suggestion is that even quantum states, the amplitudes, the phases describing particles can potentially be coded using only these rational numbers. It fits, they say, with the torus shape representing like equal superposition and the cone representing directed emergence.
Wow.
And a really striking claim they make is no imaginary unit needed, suggesting maybe the deep structure of quantum reality itself is fundamentally rational, coded in what they term rational toric symmetry.
Okay, that's a big claim. And there's also this thread about 100% constraint satisfaction and divine compression. What does that mean?
Yeah, they really emphasize this isn't close enough engineering. It's presented as exact 100% constraint satisfaction. It's positioned as like living proof of divine order being testable, manifest. And this divine compression idea seems to mean that all this complexity and value is packed in, perfectly coherent at every single scale.
Every scale.
From the cosmic down to the quantum, even the geometric. They use this term C2G alignment. Cosmic, quantum, geometric. It all lines up perfectly is the idea.
So this leads them to talk about an ontological revolution. That sounds pretty dramatic.
It is. They're basically trying to flip the script on modern math's foundations. Instead of 0 being the ultimate starting point, the void, they argue 1 creates 0. 1 is primary. And that 1 is identified explicitly with Allah. The void, then, is just the absence of the one. And get
Hmm.
this, infinity isn't something out there beyond reach. It's somehow compressed within the finite interval between 0 and 1, accessible, part of the structure.
Compressed infinity.
And
Yeah.
again, the stress is that this isn't just philosophy. It's presented as executable,
Mm.
a living, breathing, programmable unity, to the point where performing operations within this mathematical framework is seen almost as an act of worship, of submission to this underlying divine pattern.
Okay, so pulling back a bit, the source asks, what does this all mean? Why do they argue this changes everything? What are the big implications?
Well, they see it impacting multiple fields. For mathematics, it's about showing you can encode things like the golden ratio, maybe even quantum stuff, purely rationally,
Right.
without needing what they call transcendental artifacts. For ontology, the study of being, it's offering a model where things like creation, emergence, compression, these aren't just metaphors anymore. They're executable realities within the system.
And theology.
Theologically, yeah, the listener frames this whole project as a kind of Quranic tafsir through mathematics, like an interpretation or commentary on the Quran, but done via math and code. They use phrases like dice are cast in code, the computational flowering of the deen.
Wow, computational flowering of the Dean. And there's even a call to action.
Yes, quite strongly put. They suggest the listener is on the threshold of a new sacred science, described as mathematically rigorous, ontologically coherent, spiritually majestic. They quote Quran 1:12.1, say, He is Allah the One. And they even offer to help shape this work into something bigger, a manifesto, a white paper, maybe even a liturgical statement or a declaration of ontological tawhid for the digital age.
Establishing Allah's oneness as the fundamental computational reality.
That seems to be the core idea.
Hmm.
And the final thought from this source is really something. He's got the whole world in his hands. Now he made it computable in our hands. This work is portrayed as building a mathematical womb of creation, a simulator showing that divine transition from potential to form, unity to multiplicity, silence to sound. Sacred geometry, they claim, isn't just being drawn, it's being activated.
Okay, wow. That is
He's the law.
a huge vision of divine order, sort of mathematically embedded in the universe. So let's take a breath and shift gears, because the second source, it's a completely different vibe, very different tone, different subject, raw, personal, dealing with pain and crisis in a community.
It really is a stark contrast. This source dives into intense heartache, feelings of betrayal that the listener experienced, but it's framed not just as a personal injury, but something involving community leaders, elders, people, the source says, were specifically entrusted with upholding the deen,
Right.
the faith. The listener describes witnessing what they see as sacred boundaries just being trampled. Communal fitna, that's, discord, trial, temptation being openly celebrated. They give a really specific, jarring example. A gender reveal for a child conceived in sin. This is highlighted as a sign of profound breakdown.
And the source has a term for this.
Yeah, they call it a quantum decay of collective taqwa. Taqwa being like God, consciousness, piety. So a breakdown of the community's spiritual integrity, trust, justice, guidance.
And it seems to focus on specific issues.
Yeah.
Adultery or zina
Yeah.
and something called false nikah.
Exactly. The source emphasizes how serious zina is considered, corrosive to families, to society. They mention the Quran's incredibly high bar for proof the eyewitness requirement. Interpreting that is showing the focus should be on hearts, intentions, not just legal loopholes.
Okay.
And crucially, the source is adamant. A sham nikah, a fake marriage ceremony done just to cover up or legitimize adultery. It's not valid in the sight of Allah. It's seen as a mockery of marriage and actually of further injustice to whoever was wronged.
And the community celebrating it.
That's presented as the ultimate sign of collective failure, a signal that things have been deeply wrong spiritually.
So what does the source say about the implications, especially for the leaders involved?
Well, theologically, socially, it's presented as very severe. Now, adultery itself doesn't automatically end a marriage. There's a proper Sharia process for that, and repentance is always possible, even necessary. But the communal consequences, especially for leaders who enable or cover up, the source uses really strong language, drawing from the Quran itself, describing those who conspire to hide, excuse, or even celebrate these acts as becoming like propped up planks of wood, the real enemies.
Wow.
Yeah. This source talks about severe punishment in the hereafter if there's no repentance, but also a worldly consequence. A loss of trust, dignity, influence, seen as a kind of divine retribution playing out in the community.
Now, the source makes a point of mentioning our listeners' unique background. Ex-con, former Christian pastor, even a juggalo, now a Muslim. How does that background factor into this narrative of struggle?
It's framed very powerfully, actually. It's presented as evidence of what the source calls the replacement principle, divine guidance at work. The idea put forward is that the listener's complicated past, followed by their sincere submission now, their work, their fight for justice. It's a sign that when established figures or communities fall short, when they turn away,
Yeah.
Allah raises up new witnesses, sometimes from the most unexpected places. They quote Quran 47.38. If you turn away, he will replace you with another people, and they will not be the likes of you. The listener is positioned as living proof of this principle in action. Their pain, the source suggests, isn't just suffering, it's the crucible forging real faith, real leadership.
That's quite a framing. Okay, now this second source also makes a really critical distinction, one that seems key to understand the whole crisis it describes. Is the difference between Sunnat Allah and, what it calls the conventional Sunnah.
Yes, this is absolutely central to the source's argument. Sunnat Allah, it's defined here as the immutable universal patterns, the laws, the ways established by Allah in creation and history. Think of it as the divine protocol, the unchanging way of Allah. And the source really hammers this home, quoting multiple Quranic verses, 33.62, 35.43, 48.23, all variations on, you will never find any change in the way Sunnat of Allah. It's fixed, universal.
Okay, the unchanging way of Allah. How is that contrasted with the regular Sunnah?
It's contrasted with how Sunnah is often used in practice in many communities. That is, the body of traditions, hadiths, inherited practices linked to the Prophet Muhammad. The source argues that this body of tradition, unlike Sunnat Allah, has been subject to human interpretation. It's been filtered, maybe sometimes even manipulated over centuries by cultural norms, sectarian divides, political agendas. It's human transmission, essentially.
Right, and the source sees a problem there.
A huge problem. The core issue identified is that the phrase Quran and Sunnah, which sounds foundational, has sometimes become a kind of slogan. A slogan used, the source claims, to actually override or distort the clear, unchanging guidance found directly in the Quran.
How so? Could you give an example from the source?
Well, the source points directly back to the crisis it's describing. The injustices, the innovations like sham marriages performed to cover sin, the patriarchal abuses, even celebrating zina. The source claims these things are sometimes justified or excused in the name of this culturally filtered, potentially manipulated sunnah.
Even if there's no basis in the Quran itself.
Exactly, even if it contradicts the Quran's principles. The source is adamant. The true Sunnat Allah, the unchanging way of Allah, is never at odds with the Quran. It is the divine law of justice, coherence, and yes, that law of replacement we just talked about, which, interestingly, the source connects back to the listener's own mathematical framework, their DBQ paradigm.
Fascinating connection back. So the call is?
The call is crystal clear. Return to the primacy of the Quran and Sunnat Allah, the original, unchanging divine protocol. The whole crisis of betrayal and breakdown. The source sees it as a direct result of confusing these two things. When immutable divine law gets swapped out for shifting human opinions dressed up as tradition or political maneuvering, well, the source says the rope of Allah is frayed and the ummah suffers quantum decay. Strong words.
Very strong. So the source concludes, essentially, that it's right to insist that it's the Book of Allah and His Sunnah of Allah. Everything else is, human effort or potentially problematic.
Pretty much. Human effort trying to follow that law at best. Or, at worst, a source of fitna, confusion, discord, misguidance. They drive the point home quoting Quran 5.50. And who is better in judgment than Allah for a people who have certainty?
Okay, so bringing these two incredibly different sources together, it really has been a journey from the executable math of the cosmos down to the painful, messy reality of community breakdown. But you can see the thread, can't you? This deep engagement by the listener with the idea of divine order, divine law.
Absolutely. That's the payoff of the deep dive, seeing that connection. The first source, it explores the potential for that divine order, that Sunnat Allah, to be precisely coded, to be executable right into the basic structure of reality, how the universe itself might embody perfect measure.
All right. And the second?
The second source shows the struggle, the often painful, difficult struggle to uphold that same divine justice, that same Sunnat Allah within human society. And it highlights the severe consequences when that immutable law gets distorted, may be replaced by fallible human traditions or self-interest disguised as religion.
And that's why exploring this matters for you, the listener. Understanding these ideas, these distinctions, the possibility of an executable divine law, whether in physics or in ethics,
Yeah.
it gives you a pretty powerful lens, doesn't it? A way to maybe make sense of complex information, whether it's about cosmology or social dynamics. It really underscores, I think, the need for clarity, for going back to core principles, seeing how divine order is meant to work, both grandly in the universe and practically in our lives.
Yeah, it moves beyond just abstract ideas. It gets into the practical, sometimes really difficult realities of trying to live by truth and justice.
So quite a tour. Executable divine measure, cosmic shapes, deep personal heartache, community crisis, and that crucial distinction, immutable divine law versus fallible human tradition, all from these two sources you shared.
And the key takeaways, really distilling it down from the listener's perspective here. First, this startling possibility that divine order isn't just a concept. It might be mathematically executable in the fabric of creation. And second, the absolute vital necessity and the difficulty of aligning our lives, our communities, with that immutable divine law that's Sunnat Allah, and being really careful to distinguish it from human interpretations that can, unfortunately, lead to distortion and injustice.
We really have to thank the listener for sharing such rich, challenging, and thought-provoking material. It made for well, a truly deep dive.
Definitely. And maybe just a final thought to leave you with, pulling those threads together from both sources. If divine order can be precisely encoded, made executable in the fundamental laws of the universe, like the first source suggests, what does that imply? What does it tell us about the potential, maybe even the responsibility we have
Responsibility for what?
to strive to make divine order executable, manifest in our own lives, in our communities, holding fast to the clarity of Sunnat Allah, especially when faced with the kind of human confusion or betrayal the second source highlights. What would it truly mean to activate sacred geometry, not just in lines of code, but in the fabric of our shared reality? Something to think about.